Confronting your relationship with alcohol is something that I think we all should do. Welcome back to another episode of Irrepressible, ordinary people with extraordinary resilience. And in this episode, I speak to the second half of the sober experiment, Alex. And in this episode, we talk about Alex's drinking and how that progressed. She dives in and talks about what life was like as a child growing up with an alcoholic parents, what that looked like, the impacts that had on her, and how her relationship with alcohol progressed over her life until the point where she decided to create change. I think this is a really, really important episode. It really dives into how we should and could address our relationships with alcohol. I think the big learning from this one is that I took away is that it's never too late for anybody. You're never too far gone, and change is always possible. If this is the first time that you've ever been here, please make sure that you subscribe and turn on the notifications so you know each and every time we post a video. And I hope you take as much from this as I did. Alex, how are you doing?
I'm pretty good. Very hot and bothered in the weather, but pretty good. What about you, Josh? How are you doing?
Exactly the same as that. I've when we're recording like this, I don't want my fan on because I just assume it will make a noise, so it's even worse in here. But coping.
Yeah, I'm the same. Windows closed because of the road, so we'll just boil alive. It'll be okay.
That's exactly it. That is exactly it. So look, rather than me trying to introduce you, why don't you tell us who you are and what you're doing in the world today before we start?
Yeah, okay. So my name's Alex Walker. I'm 42-year-old mum of 3 children. My main thing at the moment is that I work as part of the sober experiment with my lifelong best friend Lisa. We deliver workplace presentations about mental health and alcohol. And we also have several support groups. We have a Be Sober Manchester social group. So there's quite a lot going on, but most of what we do is based around sobriety and alcohol and mental health. And we obviously support Nacoa as well with donations from the work we do. So
Yeah. And the work, I genuinely think this, the work that you do is in a space that's so very needed, and I think was like a space that wasn't really available, right, until guys like you sprang up. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, you have like your kind of like things that seem to be there for like the raging alcoholic who's like right at the end. But I love what you're doing, creating that space for people who might feel like they're more in the middle, and that's why I love that it's called the sober experiment as well, because I think it gives people, it's not about saying, look, you've got a terrible problem, here's a solution. It's about saying, why don't you experiment about your relationship with alcohol, right?
Yeah, that's it. And we basically say you don't have to be an alcoholic to be sober. And I know that sounds like really ironic, but that's what people believe. The only reason you would go sober is if it's for religious reasons or if you're an alcoholic. And there's actually a whole host of reasons to go sober.
Yeah.
And our main driver is obviously to do with the fact that both of us have experienced mental health problems over the years, and both of us have overcome them. And we put a mass kind of, well, I guess what we say is that, all right, stopping drinking doesn't solve your mental health problems, but it blooming well helps them.
Yeah.
So yeah, we place a lot of it on the fact that we're both sober now.
Amazing. And obviously all that's going to be linked in the comments here. But today we're going to talk about resilience and your kind of resilience story. So why don't you kick it off and tell us basically what the adversity that you faced that's meant that you've had to be resilient?
Yeah, I mean, I've had a difficult, I would say, difficult life anyway. Difficult for me, certainly, and it's a really subjective thing, which I know we've talked about before. But yeah, growing up in a household where I was living with alcoholic parents, and there was a lot of domestic violence, and we weren't very well off. I grew up in kind of a poor background. I was loved. I always felt loved, but there were difficulties that come along with being a child of an alcoholic. And the first thing that I want to say is that naturally has made me resilient. It doesn't always work that way for people, but for me it did, because my main motivator in life was, I am not going to be that way. I am going to better myself. I am going to do this. So whenever I kind of hit anything bad in my life, I've always tried my best to dust myself off. It's not always brilliant because I've not always dealt with those things properly, but dust myself off and move on. So I guess there's two main events in my life where I really feel I've hit quite a rock bottom, and I've struggled to pull myself out of it. The first one was about 12 years ago, and I'd lived in Cyprus briefly for a year teaching, and everything just went wrong. Everything went wrong. So, you know, I was seeing it as an extended holiday. I was going out partying, leaving my husband at home with the children, not realising that was a problem. Then I was questioned about that in my job. So they were saying, you know, your social life's over social media. I was in a bit of an embarrassing situation with the principal of the school. Then my marriage broke down. And then my dad, who had been a heavy drinker all my life, but sober for the last 10 years of his life, died suddenly of a heart attack in a car park the day after I'd flown home from England.
Wow.
So I had to quit my job, leave my home in Cyprus, move back to England, and literally I had nothing. I didn't come back to a job. My marriage had fallen apart. I didn't have a house because my house was rented out, so I was having to rent a house. I had no furniture. I had no money. I had no means to make any money. I had no transport to even get my children to school. So that, for me, is probably the worst point in my life. I was lonely. I was drinking too much. I was depressed. I was terrified. I'd racked up about £45,000 worth of debt from credit cards because I was trying to just pay for things to make ends meet. Yeah, it wasn't good. Wasn't good.
And do you think the way that you were kind of drinking and some of the things that you're doing, do you think that was born out of, you know, like a want to escape, or do you feel like it was just kind of got out of hand, or
I think
mixture
it's
of
a bit of
both?
both, you know. Yeah, I slipped into it because I'd always been very sensible, even in my early 20s. You know, if I went to the pub, I'd drink Coke, and I'd only really have one or two drinks. I don't know the point at which it went out of control. And I became a binge drinker, and I wasn't like a dependent drinker in the sense that I'd wake up and have a drink, or that I would drink to get through the day. But certainly at the end of every week, I saw it as my release, and I just wouldn't know when to stop. It'd start from as soon as I finished work on Friday. And, you know, sometimes I would drive to work on the Monday, still drunk.
Yeah.
And I know, looking back, I was still drunk. I nearly had a bad car accident in Cyprus. I nearly drove off the edge of a cliff because I hit a rock. I was actually drink driving.
Wow.
And it's only, you know, for the grace of God, go I that I didn't kill anyone else, so I'll kill myself at that point. But I was in reckless mode. You know, if I look back at that point, I didn't care. That was the thing. I didn't care that I was drinking heavily. I didn't care if I drove off a cliff. I didn't care that, you know, my marriage had broken down. I just wanted to hit destruction and like just go out and get plastered. And I thought I was having a good time. Looking back, I was so desperately lonely and unhappy and lost and confused. And I just had enough of holding it together for years and years and years and being the sensible one. I think I had a bit of a breakdown looking back. And I went a bit crazy with it, like, you know, crazy with the drinking. I mean, not necessarily, you know, I didn't notice that there was any mental impact on me at that point. I hadn't accepted it. I just thought I was a wild child, and that was that.
Yeah, and I really relate with that kind of. It's like almost just you're toughing it out. It's like you're just toughing life out. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just doing whatever. And there's no real sort of care for trying to progress as a person. You know, all the sort of stuff that I do in my life today of can I better myself and all of that. I think in my 20s it was more just like get through the day, whatever that means. And if that means getting absolutely steaming on a Sunday and driving to work on a Monday, you know, drunk, then so be it. You know, I didn't even think past that.
Yeah, and I've pulled myself together in many ways because, I mean, I was 31 when that happened, 30 to 31. And I kind of recognised, I remember my mum coming round to the house that I was renting, and, you know, I had no furniture and I was sat on the floor and I was head in hands and I was crying, saying, I miss my dad, I've got nothing, I've got no money, what am I going to do? I can't afford food. My children, and I just didn't, you know, I didn't know what to do. I couldn't cope. And I remember saying, just get up off that floor, get up off the floor and do something, like phone the bank, ask for an overdraft, walk to the school, just do something, for God's sake, Alex, just get up. And I, you know, I did. I did just get up, and I did work it out through that point. That is definitely the lowest point, I would say, of my life. It didn't get better and stay better. I've had another big dip since then, in the last 18 months, but it never got back as bad as that.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
what can you I guess you probably can't, but maybe what can you pinpoint what it was in that moment that like said to you or made you say to yourself, just get up, just do something, just put one foot in front of the other type thing?
I looked around. I remember the moment. I remember sitting on the floor, and I remember with my head in my hands, and I remember feeling absolutely hopeless. I've got nothing at all. And my mum saying, get up, and I'm just crying and saying, I can't. And she left. And I remember sitting and looking around and thinking, oh my God, I said I would never do what they've done. I'm drinking. I'm not looking after my children properly. I'm not putting my finances in order. I've got a house that if I just do it up, I could move into. I'm a qualified teacher. I can get a job. I can stop behaving like an idiot. I can use the money that I'm spending on going out and buy a run around car. I can walk to school. And it was just that kind of realization that I wasn't doing even the little things. I wasn't putting one foot in front of the other. And I knew I wouldn't change things overnight. And I guess that's what the barrier was. I was scared. Scared to make the steps, because then you have to admit that I'm in debt and I'm going to have to go bankrupt, and I'm going to have to drive around in an old banger car if I can even afford one. It was the fear of the unknown that was holding me back. But just sitting there in that moment, and it really was a switch. And I thought, you've got to get up. It was a physical, you've got to get up off this floor. You've got to phone a bank. You've got to walk your children to school because they're suffering. They were just running riot. And it was just that very moment of realization of, I said I would never let myself get here, and I have.
Yeah. So then what did you do? Because, by the way, I want to take the big learning out of that, because I think that will resonate with a lot of people. That almost, like, what I took from what you said is almost feeling like you're too far gone now. Like there's too much to get back to any kind of normality. Is too much. But actually the big learning in there is things changed when you said, I can walk the kids to school. I can paint the house, right? I might not be able to change my life and become like a spiritual guru by tomorrow, but I can do, there's things that I can do right now to put one foot in front of the other. And that feels like a massive like takeaway to people that might be in a similar situation.
Yeah, definitely. And it is the small things. If I remember rightly, the first thing I did on that day was I phoned a teaching agency and said, I'm looking for casual work. I need work 3 days a week. And the second thing I did was I phoned the tenant that was living in the house that I was renting out and said, I'm serving you your notice. Because I knew by doing that, I would save myself, my rent was extortionate where I was living and my mortgage wasn't. So I could do that. So it was two or three really small steps that started to make me see like little shoots of, it's not that bad. The children are at school now. Oh, right. Okay. I've got a day's work. I've got a month to have to suffer these bills and then move into my house again. So then once that momentum starts and you start seeing the positives popping up here and there, you can see hope. And I think that's all I needed, because I didn't get to be suicidal, and it would be unfair if I said that I had suicidal thoughts. But what I did experience, and I think this is quite common and much more common than we talk about, is wishing I would disappear.
Yeah.
That lying there in my own sorrow and self-pity. And that's what it was. It was self-pity. That I'd brought a lot of it on myself, and for various reasons. But a lot of what I was going through was avoidable. Yeah, I couldn't change the fact that my dad had died. I probably didn't want to change the fact that my marriage had broken down and I'd returned to England. But I'd got myself in debt. I'd got myself into a situation where I didn't have a job. I'd got myself into a situation where I wasn't looking after my children properly. So that there were things that I could change. And I think when I realised that I could change those things, the other things started to fall into place. And I like I say, I lay there and I remember lying in that self-pity and thinking, if I died now, I wouldn't care. So I didn't want to take my life, but I didn't want to be alive.
Yeah. And I think that's like the kind of grey area that a lot of people will find themselves in, right? Where that's like,
Yeah.
I'm not, you know, I don't necessarily want to die, but it doesn't frighten me. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
I
and
remember
I didn't
feeling
want
like
to
that.
fight to live. That's so sad when when you realise, there's a saying, isn't there? You only live once. Well, no, you live every day. You only die once. And I
Yeah.
wasn't living. I was just existing, and I was existing, and I felt trapped and scared and
Mm,
hopeless, and it could have very quickly spiraled to become suicidal
yeah.
very easily.
Yeah.
Um, if it wasn't for my own kind of grit, and it is grit. At the beginning, I'm not going to pretend that was easy.
No.
Just getting up in the morning was not easy. I struggled. Just finding a purpose for myself, I struggled. It
Mm,
was the fact that I had a couple of people around me saying, "This isn't you. You need to sort yourself out." My children, and the voice in my head saying, "You can do this. You can do it."
yeah. 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 No, that's I love what you said there as well about people say you only live once and actually you don't. You live every day.
Yeah,
There's another flip of a saying that I quite like where people say life is short, which it is, but it's also the longest thing you'll ever do. And
yeah,
I got a lot of comfort in that when I started on my journey, because it's like you think to yourself, I'll never turn all of this around, right? Life's too short. I've wasted this many years, but actually the reality is there is loads of time, right? And the journey is, I know it sounds a bit cheesy, but it is that journey that's like the real blessing, right? That's really powerful.
yeah. And life's up and down. Like I stayed in a good place after that for quite a long time, but that doesn't mean you stay in a good place all the time. The drinking crept up again. I crashed and burnt again, and that's the reason that I ended up going sober following a miscarriage, which it was the second event that I was going to talk about, but I'm not going to go into major detail about it. But yeah, it doesn't mean that you're never going to face problems again because you've come through one, but you do get armed with the tools to be able to face it and go, you know what, I've been here before, I can do this.
Mm,
I didn't get to the point of hopelessness. What I have realised through those two major events and by stopping drinking is that I've actually got a diagnosed anxiety disorder. And having just that makes me know, actually, you know what, a lot of the reason that I go to these dark places, and it was only 3 weeks ago, I was back thinking, I wish I wasn't here. I'm
yeah.
not saying it goes away, but I've got reasons to fight and reasons to live. And I know there's a chemical imbalance in my brain, which makes me feel so much more normal than thinking there's, something wrong with me all the time, or why can't I learn? Because, we're just not open enough about the fact that probably 90% of people who go through these things have undiagnosed mental health conditions.
Yeah, and it's so important to stress as well that the healing journey is not linear, right? And it's not like
Yeah,
you don't go through those things that you've been through, and you talked about that, the miscarriage happening again. It's not like because you went through everything else that just doesn't touch you and you're like a spiritual giant who just kind of, I know how to deal with
no,
this now. You know how to deal with it, but these things still hurt. And
yeah,
I think that's so important. I've noticed it as, somebody who puts out the content that I do. I often get people say to me, "Oh yeah, but you know, I'm not as far along as you," or I'm sure you do fine with that." And I think, no, I don't. I'm rubbish, right? I'm the reason I have to do the healing work is because I'm rubbish with emotions, right? And so my journey is one that is not linear, and on any given day, I can feel exactly the same as the day when I woke up after I quit drinking. Do you know what I mean?
it is. It's so true. And I think it is just that, nothing's linear. Recovery is not linear. Healing's not linear.
Mm,
Pain isn't linear. Grief isn't linear. I found myself grieving after stopping drinking for my dad's death, which was 11 years ago, less than a year ago, because it was so unresolved. And I think it's only when you start to, take those looks inside and think to yourself, right, what happened there? What triggered that? What
mm,
made that feel so painful? It's almost like pulling the scab back off, and like you're having to go through it again.
yeah.
But it's only when you do that and you do that self-development work that you will come out the other side having learned lessons. And I do work on myself every single day.
Yeah.
every day. You know, it's not easy. I find myself harder work than anyone else I look after in my household.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But by the way, that really comes across, right? Because I do think, and I'm not kind of calling anyone out, but I do think in the mental health space, you have the people who kind of have this fixed idea of what everything is, and then they put that out in the world. And if you challenge it, they don't kind of like it. And then you have people like, and I would put you in this space, and hopefully myself, and I could name other people who are consistently just wanting to learn. And it's like, if somebody brings something else to the table, it's not like, no, that's the wrong way, this is the right way. I always see in the work that you do with the Sober Experiment, particularly on the lives that you did on Facebook regularly, it was always like, what can we abstract and learn and perhaps take something from and do something differently as a result of who we're hearing. And I think that's just so important to know that. And that's why this has been born, really, is to give people these kind of stories to think, you know what, maybe I can take something from that for myself.
Yeah, and I think everybody's journey is so different, and I've learned from you actually that, what I did for a very long time was say, oh, I've not had it as bad as other people. Shut up. It's not that bad. Stop moaning about it. It's not that bad. You know what? You could be somebody who's sailed through life with nothing, crash your car and have a nervous breakdown.
Yeah.
Because nothing else has happened to you to build that resilience in you. That doesn't mean that your story isn't a tragedy for you. And, when I look at my story now, I see it for what it is. I had a terrible childhood. I had love, but I also had a lot of pain and a lot of trauma in there. My dad was a drinker. He was violent. He then got sober, but it doesn't solve the fact that he got sober when I was 19. Doesn't give me back those 19 years where I could have had a happy childhood.
Yeah.
The loss of 2 babies is not compensated by the fact that I've still got 3. No matter how much, it's one of the worst things that I hear said, oh, at least you've got 3 healthy children. Yeah, I still had 2 that died.
Yeah.
We shouldn't undermine our own journeys and by looking for the validation externally in somebody else's, because something minor in your eyes, someone else's eyes might have happened, but to you it could be the worst thing that's ever happened in your life.
Exactly.
And that makes it tragic for you.
Yeah. And that's, you're talking so much about emotional maturity for me there, right? In terms of like, what you said about, I've got 3 healthy children. I love that. You can take that away from me. Right. And I lost 2 babies, and that hurts like, and that doesn't really help that. I feel both. And it's the same with your dad. Incredibly grateful. Couldn't be more grateful that he got sober and you got those 10 years with him, and still feel the pain and everything else that come with the first 19 years. Right. And we always try and do that, where we try and take one emotion and go dispel that other emotion, when actually it don't work like that. It's way more just like, no, both exist. One hurts and one's great. And for me, that's like real emotional maturity, to be able to do that. It's not black and white, right? Everything's in the gray and in between.
And that takes time, and that's where the work needs to be. It's acceptance. It's falling many, many times before you can actually get back up again, and stand up in the living room and get up from leaning on the radiator and put one foot in front of the other. Whether that be a physical thing or like a metaphorical thing. But I think if every day I make one step forward to learn something new that's going to help me to not go back to those dark places, then I'm pretty happy that I'm doing a good job for myself and for the people that I work with.
Yeah. And I think that's the biggest thing to take from this. And we're coming up to time, so I'm a bit conscious of that. But like, the biggest learning for me to take from this is, no matter where you are, no matter how bad it gets or how good it gets, you still got to put one foot in front of the other. And that's where the work is, isn't it?
Absolutely.
That's what it is on any given day. And I think I even have routines in my life that are like built to be that one foot in front of the other. So I do stuff in the morning that's one foot in front of the other, so that if the rest of the day goes to shit, at least on that day, I put one foot, I made some headway. Do you know what I mean? And I just think it's such a simple yet really powerful learning to take away.
Lisa and I, just before you do go, we've since being children, and we've only just realised the relevance of it, but when one of us is upset and phones the other one and cries, and this goes back to being 11, I used to say to her and she'd say to me, right, go and wash your face and brush your teeth. Right. And I know that sounds so trivial, but we still use it now. The first thing I do every morning, I wake up, I go into the bathroom. Before I do anything else, I splash cold water on my face and I brush my teeth, because I'm alive and I'm okay and I can get through the day. And it's such a small thing, but it does
so
help.
powerful. It's that, honestly, I know it sounds simplistic, but in the context of everything that we've said, it's so true. That, you know, have you ever seen the guy? There's a guy, like some army soldier guy who's like, you want to be successful, start your day by making your bed. Have you ever seen that?
No, but that's what Lisa says, so I think she must have watched him.
Yeah, he says start the day by making your bed. He's like, because then if all else fails, you're done a win. And it is that stuff, and I think it's just so important. Just quickly before we end, for anyone that's watching it, where's the best place to find you and the incredible work that you're doing?
We've got a good presence on Instagram and Facebook at Sober Experiment, and have a website, www.soberexperiment.co.uk.
Yeah,
so they're the best places.
And I'll link all of that in there. Look, I want to say thank you. You know, every time I sort of interview people, I just think to myself, I don't know why I made these interviews 20 minutes. They need to be an hour because there's so much stuff out of there. But what I do think is that because we're restricted by that 20 minutes, we get so much of the power out. So I just want to say I really appreciate you and the work that you're doing. And I mean that as well, genuinely, particularly the Sober Experiment. I think it's incredible work. Is there anything you want to say before I wrap up? Anything that you want to say to anyone? Let's say anything that you might want to say to someone that might be watching this in a similar situation to what you found yourself in the past. What would you say?
Do one thing that pulls you up. One thing, whether that be to look in the mirror and say, I'm alive, whether it be to make yourself a cup of tea and write down a plan. Do one thing. It can be small, but it will move you forward.
Yeah, and I'll just finish and add to that by saying, wash your face and brush your teeth. And it'll be all right. Incredible. So thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Josh. Thank you.